unmute him. Oh, it's got full.
Just tell him to unmute.
Bismillah, Razawai.
Chalo, Bismillah.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Qul a'udhu birabbin nas, malikin nas, ilahin nas, min sharril waswasil khannas allazi yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas, min al-jannati wan nas. Sadaqallahu aliyul azim.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. یہ سوچتا ہوں کہ عابد کا حال کیا ہوگا، یہ سوچتا ہوں کہ عابد کا حال کیا ہوگا، اسیر ہو کہ وہ جب شام میں گیا ہوگا، یہ سوچتا ہوں، سونا ہے شام میں جاتے ہی خون رونے لگا، سونا ہے شام میں جاتے ہی خون رونے لگا، نہ جانے شمر نے اس وقت کیا کہا ہوگا، یہ سوچتا ہوں، گلے کے طوق نے عابد کو کیا جھکانا تھا، گلے کے طوق نے عابد کو کیا جھکانا تھا، وہ اپنے کھوئے ہوئے لال ڈھونڈتا ہوگا، وہ اپنے کھوئے ہوئے لال ڈھونڈتا ہوگا، یہ سوچتا ہوں، وہ یاد کرتا تو ہوگا یاد کرتا تو ہوگا وطن کی شاہی کو بہن کو دفن جو پردیس میں کیا ہوگا بہن کو دفن جو پردیس میں کیا ہوگا یہ سوچتا ہوں کہ عابد کا حال کیا ہوگا اسیر ہو کے وہ جب شام میں گیا ہوگا یہ سوچتا ہوں درود پڑھ
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والصولة الحيدرية والعصمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الرذبية والجود الثقفية والنقاوة النقبية والحيمة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه أما بعد فقد قال الإمام زين العابدين لو مات ما بين المشرق والمغرب لما استوحشت بعد أن يكون القرآن معي صدق مولانا الإمام زين العابدين For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatima al-Zahra, salamullahi alayha, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali. When one examines the system of divine guidance, they'll notice that whenever Allah, He would send His guide, He would send His prophet. He would send them with a miracle according to the medium of that time period. When he sent Nabi Yusuf, within the time of Yusuf, you find the art form of that time was the interpretation of the dreams. So he gave Yusuf an ability to interpret dreams, the likes of which no one had. You find in the time period of Nabi Musa, the peak art of that time was magic. So what did Allah He give towards Musa? He gave him that Asad, that staff which would turn into a snake, and he would give him al-yadul bayda. He would give him that luminous hand. You would find while others would use magic, that Musa would show a miracle to prove his prophethood. You find in the time period of Nabi Isa, you find the chief art form of that time was medicine. That within that time period, Nabi Isa would be able to cure the leper, to cure the blind, to bring the dead back to life. But you find in the same way, in the time period of the Prophet, the chief art form of that time were two. Number one, it was the ability to fight in battle with the sword, and number two, it was rhetoric and poetry. So Allah, He gave the Prophet a reply to both of them. In terms of the sword, He gave him the wujud and the dhat of Amir al-Mu'mineen. In the reply towards the Arabic and rhetoric, He gave him the Quran. That what is the reality of this Quran? You know, it's stated every single language. There are two categories. The first category of speech is an-nathar, prose. When I'm speaking right now, this is straightforward speech. This is what's called prose. But the second type of speech within any language is an-nadam, poetry. But when it comes to the Arabic language, you find the Arabic is that only language where there aren't two categories of speech, there are three categories of speech. That you have prose, you have poetry, and you have Quran. For Quran, neither was it nathar, neither was it nadam. The Quran, it gave a reality to rhetoric the likes of which society hadn't seen. You know, it stated that when Surat al-Kawthar was revealed, they put Surat al-Kawthar on the wall of the Kaaba. Within that time period, there was a poet by the name of Shah. Sheen Ain, that was his name. This Shah, year round he wouldn't speak. And he would say, if I speak constantly, there will be times when my speech is eloquent, and there will be times when my speech is not eloquent. So what he would do is that once a year, there would be a gathering with all those people within Arabia, and he would recite his poetry there. But besides that, he would stay silent. So they took this Surat al-Kawthar towards Shah. They say, oh Shah, whenever people, they bring poetry towards you, you correct their poetry, you bring it on the right wazan, you bring it on the right meter, oh Shah. That when they would bring poetry, when he would go outside his home, he would correct that poetry, but he wouldn't speak. He would only use his pen to correct it. But when they take Surat al-Kawthar towards Shah, he reads the verses. It says, Inna a'tainaka al-Kawthar, fasalli li rabbika wanhar, inna shani'aka huwal abtar. That Shah who wouldn't speak year round, at that point he says, Ma hada min kalam al-bashar, bal huwa fawka min kalam al-bashar. He says, this is not the works of an ordinary human being, but it has a higher reality towards it. That you find this is that reality of the Quran. And if you want to understand the Quran, you find there is a hadith from our fourth Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And this hadith is none other than that hadith which I recited at the beginning of this majlis. You know what the Imam says? That if you want to understand the reality of the Quran, understand it through the tongues of the speaking Quran, those Quranun Natiq. Imam Zainul Abidin, he says, لو مات ما بين المشرق والمغرب لما استوحشت بعد أن يكون القرآن معي. The Imam, he states that if everyone upon this planet, everyone from the east to the west passed away, I would not feel any fear or loneliness if I had the Quran with me. That the question comes up is that why does Imam Zainul Abidin say this? That when we have the Quran, and the Quran is a living miracle, you see the difference between the Quran and the miracle of the other Anbiya is that to see that luminous hand of Musa, to see that staff which turns into a snake, you had to be in a specific zaman and a specific makan. You had to be in a specific place at a specific time. To see the miracle of Yusuf, it was the same. To see the miracle of Isa, it was the same. But you find Rasulullah's guidance is ila yawm al-qiyamah, until the day of judgment. Doesn't the hadith say, halalu Muhammadin halal ila yawm al-qiyamah wa haramuhu haram ila yawm al-qiyamah? That what is prohibited by Rasulullah is prohibited until the day of judgment, and what is permitted until the day of judgment. You find Rasulullah was given a living miracle until the day of judgment. You know, oftentimes we say that if we were in the time period of the Anbiya, we would see the miracles of the Anbiya and we would have strong iman and faith. But you find the reality is this, is that there is a miracle within our homes. It sits upon our shelves. That miracle is the Quran. That what is the reality of the Quran? Why does the Imam say that if everyone passed away from the east to the west and I had the Quran, I wouldn't feel any loneliness? And why is it that when we have the Quran, we don't feel the same attachment towards the Quran? You find one of the reasons is because we haven't understood the reality of the Quran. From the Zahir and the outward, you find that this Quran is 6,600 verses, but the batin and the inner reality of the Quran is that all of the realities which were written on the celestial tablet, on that Al-Lawh al-Mahfud, are comprised in the Quran. That Imam Muhammad al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, Imam al-Baqir would say that when you look at a verse of the Quran, the verse of the Quran has a zahir and a batin. It has an outward and an inward, and that inward has an inward. And he says that there are 70 layers to the verses of the Quran. And us Ahlul Bayt are the ones who understand all 70 layers of the Quran. That when you want to understand the reality of the Quran, one of the ways to do so is to look at the Quran. The other way to do so is to look at the narrations of Ali Muhammad. And this is why one of the most potent explanations of the Quran, one of the most powerful explanations of the reality of the Quran is found within supplication number 42 of As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyah. You see, when you look at the time period of Imam Zainul Abidin, the Imam, he wanted to give sermons in the way his grandfather Amir al-Mu'mineen would give sermons. But you find the historical circumstances, it didn't allow the Imam to speak openly. Because after Karbala, you find the Umayyad rule would keep such a vigilant watch over the Imam that every move of the Imam would be monitored. So you know what the Imam would do? He would use occult ways to spread the message of Ahlul Bayt and to spread the message of Islam. For example, one of those ways you find is that the Imam, he would train slaves within his home and he would free them. It's stated that after Amir al-Mu'mineen, no Imam freed more slaves than Imam Zainul Abidin. You know, it's stated one day that after Medina was pulverized, after Medina was rampaged by Yazid in Al-Waqiyatul Harra, you find Yazid, he would send his troops towards Medina. They would desecrate the blessed land of Medina. It's stated after that rain, it wouldn't fall in the land of Medina. So it's stated at that point, the people, they pray Salatul Istisqa. They pray that salat in which you ask for the rain to come down. It's stated as everyone is praying, a man, a slave of African descent, he goes towards the mosque of the Prophet. The narrator, he says, I saw that man lift his hand. The moment he lifted his hand, the rain, it begins to fall down. I thought to myself that who is this individual? So I followed him through the alleyways of Medina. As I followed him through the alleyways of Medina, I came to the house of Imam Zainul Abidin, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. I waited for some time. I knocked on the door. Imam Zainul Abidin, he comes out. I said to him that I want to purchase one of your slaves. The Imam, he brings out his servants. You find the man, he looks at the servants. He says, no, the one who I want to purchase, he's not over here. The Imam, he calls that servant who was within the mosque out. The moment that servant, he comes, the man says, oh Zainul Abidin, I want to purchase him. At that point, that servant, he says, oh Allah, I had promised you that as long as I was alive, I would spend my life in the house of Zainul Abidin. You see, when there were servants in the house of Ahlul Bayt, oftentimes these were freed individuals, but they found no better place to remain than the household of Ali Muhammad. That Amir al-Mu'mineen had already freed Qambar. Qambar was freed by Amir al-Mu'mineen, but he would choose out of his ikhtiyar and his will to spend time with Amir al-Mu'mineen. In the same way, this servant, he says, oh Allah, I had promised you as long as I was alive, I will spend my life in the house of Zainul Abidin. If I am leaving his house, take my life away at this moment. It's stated that servant of the Imam, he falls on the ground at that moment. That if you want to understand the status of the supplications of Imam Zainul Abidin, this is that Imam whose servants were mustajabud da'wat. That his servants were the ones whose supplications were accepted in every moment. Now try to fathom the reality of the Imam who would teach those servants. That you find the Imam, he would use different ways to spread the message of Islam. That these servants would be the leaders of society after they were freed. You know, another way that the Imam, he would spread the Islamic message is through the aza of his father. You know, people, they say and we hear that for 35 years, Imam Zainul Abidin would cry for his father Hussain. That when somebody would place water in front of the Imam, he would begin to cry. When he would walk by a butcher, he would say to that butcher, that did you give water towards that animal? The butcher would say, we are Muslims. It's within the Sharia to give water. He would say that, did you sharpen the sword? He says, yes, I sharpened the sword. He would say that, did you make sure no other animals were watching? He would say, yes, I made sure. The Imam says that when they killed my father, neither did they give him water. Neither did they sharpen the sword. At 70 paces, my aunt Zainab would watch as shimmer would sit on the chest of my father. You know, why would the Imam do this? The Imam is the peak of patience. The Imam, he wouldn't cry because he was weak-hearted, na'udhu billah. But you know the reason the Imam would cry is that when they would see the gham of Imam Zainul Abidin, they would ask the Imam why he is crying, and he would give the message of Karbala. That when we have the aza of Sayyid al-Shahadat, it is not only a reactionary role, but you find that there is a level of proactivity towards this aza. That this aza is the means to spread the message of Sayyid al-Shahadat. You know, if in this hall there was a child, and that child was laughing, you wouldn't ask that child why he's laughing. But the moment that child begins to cry, you'll ask him why he's crying. You find that this mourning is one of those elements which has kept the school of Ahlul Bayt alive. You find this was another method of Imam Zainul Abidin. But you find the final method of the Imam to spread the teachings of Islam was through his supplications. That this book of supplications, As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyya, that even in the Vatican today, they have a copy of As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyya. In the Vatican today, Henry Corbin would write that within my life, if there was anything which connected me to God, it was As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyya. And you know, they stated that within the Vatican, this book, As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyya, they keep it in a special section. And they say that this book is for those who are the most advanced of theologians. For the mystical and theological themes found within this book are uncomparable. That if you compare the supplications of the school of Ahlul Bayt to supplications from other schools of thought, and you find the realities of these supplications, you find that they will be enough to show the truthfulness of the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. You know, the Imam, that although he couldn't give khutbahs and sermons openly, within these du'as, he would give an entire message. He would give an entire course on Islamic theology. And one of those supplications which does so is supplication number 42. You find this supplication is that supplication the Imam would recite upon completing the Quran. But when you read the supplication, you find that the Imam, he unveils what the reality of this Quran is. And from this supplication, I'll examine 5 or 6 points so we can understand the Quran, and I'll move towards Masaib. But you find the first reality of this supplication. It's found within the opening line. The Imam, he says, Allahumma innaka a'antani ala khatmi kitabika alladhi anzaltahu nuran. The Imam says, oh Allah, you are the one who helped me to complete this book which you revealed as a Noor and as a light. That when you want to understand the first property of the Quran which makes it unique, through the words of Imam Zainul Abidin, the first quality of the Quran which the Imam mentions is the reality of the Quran as a Noor and a light. You know, light is of different types. You have this light which is sitting on top of us, in front of us. You find this is something which the philosophers call a Noor al-Maddi, material light. But you find there is another type of light, that Noor which is said a Noor al-Mujarrad anil Madda, that immaterial light. You find the quality of material light is this, is that when there is darkness within a room, you turn that light on, you can see the dhahir and the apparent of something. But you find through this immaterial light, you begin to see the haqaiq and the realities of things. That's why when they come towards the 6th Imam, a man by the name of Unwan al-Basri, he says, oh Imam, teach me from your knowledge. The Imam, he looks at him, he says to him, Ya Aba Abdullah, laysa al-ilmu bit-ta'allum. He says, oh Aba Abdullah, knowledge isn't acquired by learning. He says, إِنَّمَا هُوَ نُورٌ يَقَعُ فِي قَلْبِ مَنْ يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى أَنْ يَهْدِيَهُ. He says the reality of knowledge is that knowledge is a noor and a light which Allah, He places in the heart of the one whom He wants to guide. Now what does this mean, that knowledge isn't gained through learning? After all, then what is the point of universities? And what is the point of the hawza and the madaris? And what is the point of you listening to this lecture? You find causes are of 2 types. You have al-illatu naqisa and you have al-illatu tamma. You have an incomplete cause and a complete cause. An incomplete cause is when the effect does not necessarily emanate from the cause. But a complete cause is when the effect, it emanates every single time. That when you have the sun, you find every single time the rays of the sun, they emanate from the sun. But you find the reality of learning is that it is an incomplete cause. Oftentimes we learn, but we don't retain. Oftentimes we learn, but we don't learn correct information. At the end of the day, to learn, it requires tawfiq min Allah. It requires that reality from Allah. And Allah, He says, ilm is a light which He places in the heart of the one whom He wants to guide. Similarly, we see another tradition. When Allah, He speaks about the guidance of the hearts, that tradition of the sixth Imam, Imam Jafri as-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. That tradition of the sixth Imam, it states, Man aradallahu bihil khayra, qadafa fi qalbihi hubbal Hussain wa hubba ziyaratih. That tradition, it states that whenever Allah, He desires khair and good for someone, within his heart, He places the love of Hussain and the love of the ziyarah of Hussain. Now the question, it comes up. On one side, one tradition says Allah places the light of ilm and knowledge. And on the other side, He says He places the love of Hussain and the love of the ziyarah of Hussain in the heart. That are these two statements contradictions? Is there tadad between these statements? Is there discompatibility between these statements? You find both of them allude to the same reality. And that reality is that one wants the light of ma'rifatullah and that true knowledge of Allah. It is done through the light of Noor. It is done through the light of the love of Hussain and the light of the love of the ziyarah of Hussain. That you find this is that first element. The Imam, he says the Quran is a Noor and a light. In Ziyaratul Jamia, when you describe the hadith of Ahlul Bayt, you say kalamuhum Noor, that their words are Noor. That what does this mean? This means that when you want to unveil the realities of things, when you want to have basira and insight into the true system of the world, you do it through their hadith and their narrations. It's stated that once a person, he comes to Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi. They say, "Oh Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi, my child is sick. Can you give a dua?" Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi says to that lady that bring me a cup of water. When she brings that cup of water, Sheikh Abbas al-Qummi, he puts his finger within the water. He says, "Go give this to your son will be cured." The lady, she takes that water. She gives it to her son. The son drinks it. He gets shafa. He's cured at that moment. She says, "What did you recite? That when your fingers, they touch the water, at that moment you find that my son was cured." He says, "I didn't recite anything." She says, "You didn't recite anything." She says that what I would do is that with these fingers I've written thousands of hadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. That do you think Allah won't honor these fingers enough to give cure and shafa towards another individual? That you find this is that reality. So the first thing and the first quality of the Quran, which Imam Zainul Abidin, he mentions, is the reality of the Quran as a Noor and a light. After that he says, وَأَنزَلْتَهُ وَفَضَّلْتَهُ عَلَىٰ كُلِّ حَدِيثٍ قَصَصْتَ. The Imam, he says, you revealed this book and you preferred it over every single discourse which you have narrated. This goes to show the second reality of the Quran, is that the Quran is a book of guidance, that it was preferred over every single discourse. The Quran has history and the Quran has science, but the reality is that this book is a book of hidayah and guidance, that when mankind wants to understand the system of Allah, you find it's done through the Quran. And this Quran, it says, وَلَا رَتْبٍ وَلَا يَعْبِسٍ إِلَّا فِي كِتَابٍ مُبِينٍ. It says there is nothing wet nor dry except for it is within this manifest book. The question, it comes up, then does the Quran tell me how to drive my car? Does the Quran tell me how to program my phone? Does the Quran tell me when I go to my medicinal practice how I should treat my patients? But then why does the Quran, it say that everything is within this book? You find the reality is this, and I'll explain this reality through an example. That whenever you have an X-ray in front of you, and you're not a trained radiologist, when you look at the X-ray, you find everything is within that X-ray, but you're not able to spot it. Why? Because you don't have the training to understand that X-ray. But if you place it in front of a radiologist, that radiologist will be able to tell you where are the flaws and what is what within the X-ray. Now both individuals, they looked at the same thing. But one group was able to derive a different reality because they had the qualifications. You find that this book is ma'soom. This book is infallible. This book is a light. The ones who can bring out all of the realities of this book are the ones who are infallible. Because they are the ones with the qualifications. That didn't Amir al-Mu'mineen say upon the mimbar, Saluni, Saluni qabla an tafqiduni. That ask me before you lose me. Then he says, ask me about the Quran. That there was not a verse which was revealed in Medina or outside of Medina except I know the reality of that verse. He says there is no verse that was revealed in travel or within the home except I know the reality of that verse. He says there is no verse which was abrogated or the abrogator except I know the reality of that verse. You find it is a matter of qualification. Otherwise, the principles of everything are found within the Quran. And this is the nature of the Quran as a book of guidance and hidayah. But you find the third principle and the third quality of the Quran, which Imam Zainul Abidin, he mentions within this supplication, is the universality of the Quran. He says that this book is shifa'an liman ansata bifahm at-tasdeeq ila istima'ihi. The Imam, he says that this book is a cure for everyone who with understanding the confirmation of this book listens towards it. That when you look at the universality of the Quran, and I say this with full responsibility, there is no other book of religion that addresses all of humanity together like the Quran addressed all of humanity. No other book says this line, Ya ayyuhan nas. Now the question, it comes up, people they ask this question, that this book was revealed 1400 years ago. How is it relevant to the human being of today? That a book which was revealed in a specific time and in a specific place, how can this book be universal? I say the answer is within the ishkal. I say the answer is within the objection. When you say, how is this book universal? That how can it impact the human beings of today? You find that within this question, you acknowledge them as human beings. That there is something in the nature of insan, that no matter whether it is 1400 years later or 2000 years later, he is still called a human being. That there is something within our essence that doesn't change. You find the Quran, it speaks to that human essence and that human nature within the human being. That's why the Quran, it says, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةُ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. It says, turn your way towards that primordial deen, towards that religion upon which you were created. Now, I'll give you another example. The verse, it says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. Allah, he says, we will manifest for you our signs in the horizons and within yourselves, O human being, until it becomes clear that he is the truth, that he is haqq. That you find within the human being, Amir al-Mu'mineen says that, O insan, O human being, do you think that you are something small, but all of reality is within you? That the Imam, he says, Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabba. The one who has understood his reality has understood the reality of his Lord. You find the Quran, it speaks to this universality. The seerah and the path of Ahlul Bayt speaks towards this universality. That when you look at Karbala Karbala is not a movement which is mahdood and limited just to the followers of Ahlul Bayt. That when you look at history, you find Shia and Sunni, they've gathered alongside this movement of Karbala. You find non-Muslims have gathered alongside this movement. You know, there was a scholar from the subcontinent, Shah Ahmad Noorani. They said to Shah Ahmad Noorani, they said, "Oh man, are you Shia or are you Sunni?" Imagine you're asking one of the greatest Sunni scholars that, "Are you Shia or are you Sunni?" He says, "Oh man, after Karbala, I don't look at it that way. After Karbala, either you are with Hussain or you are against Hussain. And with pride, I say that I am with Hussain." You know, there was a Sikh guru, a non-Muslim. His student comes up to him. He says to him that, "Go and learn about Hussain." He says, "Hussain was a Muslim. What do I have to do with Hussain?" He says to him that, "Would you marry your sister?" He says, "I wouldn't marry my sister. That is a disgusting thought." He says, "Why is it disgusting?" He says, "Because my conscience, it doesn't allow me to do so." He says, "What you call a conscience, I call that the message of Hussain." That you find Hussain, he avails to the inner reality of the human being. That's why when you look at the history of the subcontinent, within that time period, within the rule of the Qutb Shahi and the other rulers of India, there would be a rigid caste system, that the Hindus, they would have a caste system. But oftentimes, the only time they would break down this caste system was for the message of Imam al-Hussain. When the month of Muharram would come, it didn't matter whether you were from the highest caste or the lowest caste. Everyone, they would mourn together. Why? Because of the universality. And Sayyid al-Shuhada's universality, it stems from the universality of the Quran. You find this was another aspect which the Imam, he mentions in this dua. After this, the Imam, he says, "Allahumma فَكَمَا جَعَلْتَ قُلُوبَنَا لَهُ حَمْلَةً." The Imam, he says that, "Oh Allah, you have made our hearts a vessel. You have made them a place which carries this Quran." When you want to understand the next quality and the unique perspective of the Quran, you understand the Quran through the divine presence found within the Quran. You know, understand this point very clearly. That when you have a translation of the Quran, you can translate the meaning towards a certain extent. But what you cannot translate is the divine presence and that tajalli which is found within the recitation of the Quran. What is the presence within the Quran? That if you want to understand its sacredness, take a regular piece of paper. You can do whatever you want with that paper. But the moment you recite the ayat and the verses of the Quran, the paper is the same. But now you cannot touch it unless you are in wudu. Now you cannot dispose of it in any manner that you like. Why? Because the Quran was written upon it. That what is the sacredness of this Quran? You know, in a room, the sound waves within the room, they have a normal reality. But in that room, when the Quran is recited, even those sound waves and those echoes, they become something which is blessed. That's why the Quran, it says, وَإِذَا قُرِيَ الْقُرْآنُ فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ. When the Quran is recited, listen to the Quran. And all of this, it manifests within the life of Imam Zainul Abidin. You know, there is a tradition from Al-Kafi, within Usul Al-Kafi. It's stated that oftentimes, that when Imam Zainul Abidin, salawatullahi wassalamuhu alayhi, when the Imam would recite the Quran, and there were people who were walking by the Imam, they would go into a swoon of unconsciousness. That it says, Sa'ika min husni sawtihi. That when they would hear the beauty of the voice of the Imam, they would have this type of unconsciousness overcome him. Now the question comes up, is this because of the aesthetic beauty of the voice of the Imam, or is there a deeper reality towards this? Now, without a doubt, aesthetically, the voice of the Imam had beauty. After all, this is the Warith of Dawood who would recite the Psalms and the Zabur. But you find when you want to understand this word sa'iqa, you find it occurs in one place within the Quran. When the Quran, it speaks about Musa on Mount Sinai. It says about Musa, وَلَمَّا جَاءَ مُوسَى لِمِيقَاتِنَا, that when Musa, he went for our covenant, وَكَلَّمَهُ رَبُّهُ, and his Lord, he spoke towards him. Musa, he said, قَالَ رَبِّي آرِنِي أَنظُرْ إِلَيْكَ, oh my Lord, show yourself so I can look towards you. Allah says, قَالَ لَن تَرَانِي, he says, oh Musa, you won't be able to see me. وَلَكِنْ انظُرْ إِلَى الْجَبَلِ, but oh Musa, look at that mountain. فَإِنِ اسْتَقَرَّ مَكَانَهُ فَسَوْفَ تَرَانِي, but if this mountain, it remains in its place, Musa, then you'll see me. But in the Quran it says, فَلَمَّا تَجَلَّى رَبُّهُ لِلْجَبَلِ, when Allah, he manifested himself, when he did his tajalli towards that mountain, جَعَلَهُ دَكًّا, that the mountain, it broke into pieces, and it says, وَخَرَّ مُوسَى صَائِقًا, that Musa, he would have a swoon of unconsciousness. Now look at this word sa'iqa found within the hadith when Imam Zainul Abidin would recite the Quran. The reason Musa would go unconscious is because of that tajalli which was upon the mountain. Now when al-insanul kamil, the perfect man, recites the Quran, you find that there is such a tajalli of the divine that when the people would listen to the recitation of Zainul Abidin and the way Musa would fall unconscious, the people, they would fall unconscious when they would hear the Quran on the tongue of the Imam. You find this is that divine presence found within the Quran. And we can look through line after line within this dua. But you find that these days are the days of Safar. These are the days where the caravan of Ahlul Bayt, that from Karbala towards Kufa, from Kufa towards Sham. You know, I told you that on this night, I would recite that musibah of Sham. That what musibah is this? This is that musibah when they asked Imam Zainul Abidin, oh Syed Sajjad, that what was the most difficult musibah that befell you? The Imam, he would say, Ash-Sham, Ash-Sham, Ash-Sham. You know, I would reflect that why did the Imam say it 3 times? But you find when some ulama, they did the tashri and the explanation of this line, they said that each time the Imam, he said this line, Ash-Sham, it would represent something different. The first Ash-Sham would represent the bazaar of Sham. The second Ash-Sham would represent the darbar of Sham. The third Ash-Sham would represent the zindan of Sham. That what was that marketplace in Sham? You know, it's stated that Ahlul Bayt, for a number of hours, they would stand outside the city of Damascus. That the people, they would decorate that city. They would say that it is a day of Eid, for there is a caravan of baghis and transgressors within the city. You know, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir, he has a narration, and I won't narrate the full narration. He says that there are 7 things which would pain my father in Sham. He says the first of the 7 is when they would call us baghi, when they would call us transgressors. The second of the 7 is when they would take rocks and they would throw it upon our Aunt Sayyida Zainab. He says the third of the 7 is that from the balconies, the women of Sham, they would pour boiling water upon the children of Ali Muhammad. That this is a Sham. You know, it's stated that when they enter the marketplace of Sham, and may Allah grant you the ziyarah of Sayyid Sayyida Zainab. You know that marketplace, it only takes 10 or 15 minutes to walk through that marketplace. But it's stated that for 2.5 hours, Ahlul Bayt, they would go through that marketplace. You know, it's stated within that marketplace, there was a companion of Rasulullah by the name of Sahil bin Sa'd as-Sa'idi. He says that, O Zainul Abidin, is there anything I can do? The Imam, he says, O Sahil, bring a piece of cloth. Sahil, he says, I wanted to see what he would do with the piece of cloth. You know what Imam Zainul Abidin, he did? He took that piece of cloth, he puts it in between the chain on his neck. He says, O Sahil, from Karbala towards Sham, you find that this would burn my neck. You find Ahlul Bayt, they get towards the door of the courtyard. When they get towards the door of the courtyard, it's stated that Sayyida Zainab, she sits upon the ground. I don't know what Sayyida Zainab, she was thinking when she entered the courtyard, but maybe she was thinking that in the life of my mother Fatima, a time it had come with her broken ribs, she went towards the courtyard. It's stated that Sayyida Zainab, Ahlul Bayt, they enter that courtyard. In front was Imam Zainul Abidin. On one side was Imam Muhammad al-Baqir. On the other side was Sakina. Behind the Imam was Sayyida Zainab. Behind Sayyida Zainab was Kulthum. All of the women of Ahlul Bayt, they would surround Sayyida Zainab and Kulthum. But when they entered that courtyard, there was a wife of Yazid by the name of Hind. When Sayyida Zainab, she saw Hind, she says, "Oh, Kulthum, do you recognize who that lady is?" Kulthum, she says, "Oh, my sister, after the martyrdom of Abbas, I'm not able to see it farly." You find that Sayyida Zainab, she says, "Oh, Kulthum, that is Hind who used to work within our house." You find at that point, Hind, she says, "Min ayyi biladin antum," that which city are you from? Sayyida Zainab, she says, "Nahnu min bilad al-Madina," that we are from the city of Medina. It's stated that Hind, from her throne, she comes upon the ground. She says to Sayyida Zainab, "I used to work in a house within Medina." Sayyida Zainab says, "Which house did you work in?" She says, "I used to work in the house of Ali and Fatima." She says, "Who do you know from that house?" She says, "I know Hussain, I know Abbas, I know Zainab." Sayyida Zainab says, "Oh Hind, you see that head from which your husband, he is taking a stick and he is poking the teeth of that head. That is the head of Hussain." She says, "Oh Hind, that is the head of Abbas." She says, "Oh Hind, I am Zainab." That you find this is Sham. You know, it's stated that Imam Zainul Abidin, he would say that within the courtyard of Sham, we would sit in that makan where the ghulam and the servants would sit. And we sat in the way that servants, they would sit. It's stated that there were 700 people within that courtyard. That Sayyida Zainab, she would give her khutbah. After she gives her khutbah, Imam Zainul Abidin, he stands up. You know, when Imam Zainul Abidin, he stands up, Yazid, he says towards Yazid, he says, "I'dhin li hatta asada hadihil a'wad." He says, "Oh Yazid, do you give me permission to climb this structure of wood?" The Imam, he doesn't say mimbar. Why? Because a mimbar is that spot where the fadail of Ahlul Bayt are given. A mimbar is that spot where haqq is spoken. That spot where you curse my father Ali ibn Abi Talib, that spot is not a mimbar. Then after that, Yazid, he doesn't give permission. The people, they begin to say, "Oh Yazid, let us hear something from this man." Yazid, he says, "Innahu min ahli baytin." He says that this man is from Ahlul Bayt. قَدْ زُقُّ الْإِلْمَ زَكَّى. These are those individuals that when their mothers would give them milk, within that milk would be knowledge. Imam Zainul Abidin, he gives this khutbah. He says, Ayyuhan nas, u'tina sittan wa fudilna bi sab'in, u'tina al-ilma wal-hilma wal-samahata wal-fasa'ata wal-shaja'ata wal-muhabbata fi qulub al-mu'mineen. The Imam, he says, O people, Allah has given us 6 and He has praised us with 7. He has given us knowledge and He has given us forbearance. And He has given us generosity and eloquence. And He has given us bravery. And within the hearts of the believers, Allah has placed our muhabbat. Then after that, He says, وَفُضِلْنَا بِأَنَّ مِنَّا النَّبِيَّ الْمُخْتَارِ وَمِنَّا الصِّدِّيقِ وَمِنَّا الطَّيَّارِ وَمِنَّا أَسَدُ اللَّهِ وَأَسَدُ رَسُولِهِ وَمِنَّا سِبْتَ هَذِهِ الْأُمَّةِ. The Imam says, from us is the Prophet. From us is Jafar al-Tayyar. From us is Ali ibn Abi Talib. From us is Hamza. From us are the grandchildren of this ummah. You know, as the Imam was given the sermon, the entire tide of the courtyard, it turns towards Imam Zainul Abidin. At that point, Yazid, he says to the muaddin, call the adhan. When he calls the adhan, he says, Allahu Akbar. Imam Zainul Abidin, he says, none is greater than Allah. Then the muaddin, he says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. The Imam, he says, my hair and my skin and my flesh testify there is none God other than Allah. Then after that, the muaddin, he says, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. The Imam, he turns towards Yazid. He says, oh Yazid, is Muhammad my grandfather or yours? If you say he is your grandfather, why are you lying? But if you say he is my grandfather, then why have you taken his children as captives? You find this Ahlul Bayt, they would spend time in that prison in Sham. You know what happened in that prison. I'm not here to narrate in depth. It's stated that there was one girl, the daughter of the Imam. She would cry within that prison. She would say, oh my brother Sajjad, when will we get to go towards Medina? It's stated at one point, Yazid, he hears the cries of this girl. He says to his guards that who is crying? They say it is Sakina, the daughter of Hussain. Yazid, he says, why is she crying? They say she's crying because she misses her father Hussain. At that point, Yazid says, then why don't we send the head of her father? That they put the head of Hussain within a bowl. They cover that tash, they cover that bowl. They send it towards Sakina. When that bowl, it gets towards Sakina, she says, after Karbala, what am I going to eat? They say, oh girl, this isn't food. When she uncovers the bowl, she sees the head of her father. She says, oh Baba, who cut this neck of yours, my father? She says, oh father, after you, they ripped those earrings which you gave towards me. Oh father, after you, they tied her arms from Kufa. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Ala la'natullah ala al-qawm al-dhalimin. Ya Allah, through the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, we ask through the right of Zainul Abidin. You know how Imam Zainul Abidin buried his sister Sakina? You know, there was a gatekeeper to the shrine of Sayyida Zana. And every time I recite this narration, I feel a strange inner state. It's stated that this gatekeeper had 6 daughters. One night, one of his daughters, she sees within her dreams Imam al-Hussain. Imam al-Hussain, he said that water has come into the shrine of my daughter. You find that after that, a second daughter, she sees this. A third sees it, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth. That gatekeeper by the name of Ibrahim al-Dimishki, He says, no, we can't go towards that grave. This is the grave of Ahlul Bayt. So he goes, he asks the marja of that time, Sayyid Muhsin al-A'mali. Sayyid Muhsin al-Amali, he says, no, this is an order from the Imam. You find that gatekeeper, he goes within the shrine of Sakina. They dig open that grave. When he goes into that grave, he comes out and crying, he falls unconscious. They say towards him that, why do you cry in this manner? He says, I cry for the ghurba of my master Sayyid Sajjad. That when he buried his sister Sakina, he buried her in that abba which he used to wear. He buried her in such a state that her arms were tied and he only had... Ya Allah, we ask through the right of Imam Zainul Abidin, that wherever the followers of Ahlul Bayt are in difficulty, help them. Ya Allah, we pray for the intercession of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. And we pray for the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, Majlis of Hussain.
Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Amma Fiza, bata de mujhko, पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं कैसा है ये चरागा दिल डूबे जा रहे हैं क्या शाम आ गया है अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं नेज़ों पे जितने सर हैं एक सर है उनमें ऐसा आंखें हैं बंद उसकी और खाक पर है गिरता अब्बास का ये सर है तेवर बता रहे हैं क्या शाम आ गया है अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं होने लगी अज़ाने कैसे सरों को ढांपे बाजू बंधे हुए हैं रो रही हैं आंखें आंखों के हूं से रस्ते खून में नहा रहे हैं क्या शाम आ गया है अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं आया जो बाबे सावत रो के गए मुसाफिर कहता था शिमर इनको करना अभी ना हाजिर दरबार को अभी हम दुल्हन बना रहे हैं क्या शाम आ गया है अम्मा फिजा बता दे मुझको पत्थर क्यों आ रहे हैं माओ की गोदियों से जकड़े हुए हैं बच्चे हैं हाथ रस्सियों में माओ के ऐसे जकड़े बच्चे जो गिर रहे हैं वो मरते जा रहे हैं کیا شام آ گیا ہے اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اتنا چلے ہیں پیدل کانٹوں پہ سارے قیدی تھک جاتی چلتے چلتے چلتی اگر زمین بھی پیروں کے آبلے بھی آنسو بہا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں نیزے پہ رو رہا ہے مشکل کشا کا بیٹا نامحرموں کے لب پر آیا ہے نام میرا مجھ کو کنیز زادے یوں بھی رلا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اماں فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد
Allah Bismillah.
متوجہ زیارت اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا باعث الهدى السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين السلام عليك وعلى جدك وأبيك السلام عليك وعلى أمك وأخيك السلام عليك على 9 معصومين من ذريتك وبنيك صلى الله عليك وعلى أخيك بالفضل العباس وعلى أختك أم المصائب زينب وعلى ولديك العليين الشهيدين وعلى المستشهدين بين يديك جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته سيدي يا صاحب العصر والزمان الأمان 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 من فتن الزمان السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك واجعلنا من أعوانك وأنصارك جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم ارزقنا في الدنيا زيارة الحسين وفي الآخرة شفاعة الحسين. اللهم اكتبنا من زوار الحسين واجعلنا من الباكين في عزاء الحسين. اللهم احشرنا تحت لواء الحسين. اللهم احشرنا في زمرة الحسين. اللهم ادخلنا الجنة من باب الحسين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. رحمه الله من يقرأ الفاتحة مع الصلوات للأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات. الحمد لله.